Life is a dream, time like a stream, carries our burdens away. Never despair, joys everywhere, love can befriend you today. Free from all care, like birds of the air, soar above griefs and worries, seek joy and be gay. Often on earth, things of great worth, worldly ambitions defy. Sometimes a friend helps us ascend, up from life's stairs to the sky. Love is a star, though shining afar. It can guide us and help us toward light to draw nigh. Please join us. Life is a dream, time like a stream, carries our burdens away. Never despair, joys everywhere, love can befriend you today. Free from all care, like birds on the air, soar above griefs and worries, seek joy and be gay. Often on earth, things of great worth, worldly ambitions defy. Sometimes a friend helps us ascend, up from life's stairs to the sky. Love is a star, though shining afar. It can guide us and help us toward light to draw nigh. Love is a star, though shining afar. It can guide us and help us toward light to draw nigh.
Welcome to our Sunday satsang. Now, if you just recently arrived here, my name is Nayaswamis Devi. This is my husband, Nayaswamis Jaya. And it's our joy to be here today. We've been here for a few days and got a chance to meet many of you. Went out to breakfast and lunch and dinner, and I don't remember what all we've done so far. But we've had a very nice time here, and it's been very nice to meet all of you. So our subject today, the reading today in the Rays of the One Light, is called Ego, Friend or Foe. And so I thought I would begin with just a little short reading from Whispers from Eternity. If I could only see it. Bless me, that I may perceive thee through the windows of all joyous activities. Look upon me, and cheer me always as I engage in my daily duties. Let my every action, whether waking, sleeping, or dreaming, be sprayed by the fountain of thy presence. When I'm in America, sometimes people ask me, do you miss India? And I usually say, yes, I miss the people very much. I sometimes dream about you, and I think about you often. And I do miss the Indian people very much. Well, I came back here a few weeks ago, and I was in Gurgaon at first, and I was chatting with an Indian friend this time, who said, do you miss India? Or he said, I guess what he said was, are you happy in America? And I said, well, yeah, and I'd like to think I can be happy anywhere, but I do miss my Indian friends. And so then we went back and forth, what is it about Indians that's different or better or whatever it is? Why is it that you miss your Indian friends when you go away. And I never did come up with a satisfactory answer. I thought of things like, well, Indians are very kind. They seem to be more kind, and it's more important to them to be kind. Maybe that's it. And they have dignity, and I don't know. There were a couple of other things that I said, and didn't really quite come up with a satisfactory answer, in my mind at least. And then later on, I thought about it again, and I realized that I think what I was trying to say was that there's that less of that sense of separateness that we have that tries to tell us that we are all separate from one another, we're separate from God, we're even separate from our environment. We're just all separate. And it doesn't feel very good. We're not happy in that. And we're always trying to find a way to experience oneness. And of course, our first efforts at it are usually terrible, and they take us off in some direction that is really bad. And we're not happy. We're certainly not happy. Then we're even more unhappy. And so we go through our lives, our many lifetimes, looking for that sense of oneness. I remember we lived in Pune for some years, and we lived in the city of Pune. We lived in an area that was under development, and so we lived in a building that had just been finished, and across the street from us was another building that was going up, a really big high-rise, and to our right, there was the labor camp of all the people who were building that building, all the construction workers. And they would be going in and out and working across the street, and I would be passing them as I would walk down to the local village to buy vegetables, and I would see them all the time. And I began to realize that I actually felt more of a connection with these people that I could not communicate with at all. Not only did they not speak English, but they didn't speak Hindi either. Of course, not that that would have helped a lot, but it would have helped some. and yet I felt a sense of kinship or connection with all of these people that I didn't know at all. And I realized that, customs and language and all of that stuff, a lot of times they just get in the way, if anything, and they don't necessarily help. We want that sense of being part of the universe, being part of the whole, and we tend to make ourselves feel separate. It's like a big jigsaw puzzle in a way, and every piece is important, and it needs to be in the puzzle. So if we lose a piece of the puzzle, we don't have the puzzle. The puzzle can't be completed, and we search the house and look under the couch and look every place for that missing piece. And we're like that ourselves. We feel like that missing piece of the puzzle. And so that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that sense of oneness, that feeling of being part of that whole of the universe. I remember quite a number of years ago, walking to work at another village in California, and walking from our house to work, which was down this long hill. And to get there, I walked through sort of a small forest, a grove of trees, actually. And as I was walking down there, I was looking to the left and the right, and I'd done this hundreds of times before, but I realized how much I felt I was part of that grove of trees. It was as though I were another tree, and everything was just all one piece. I wasn't separate. I wasn't this separate thing walking through this grove of trees. And that was one of my first sort of clues of what oneness must feel like. Well, what is it that prevents this us feeling this sense of oneness? And you might have guessed it from the title of this. It's that ego. And most of the time we think of, well, at least I always did, I think of ego as pride and arrogance, and I'm better than you, things like that. But you know, it's a few months before his passing, Swamiji said something that clarified it for me. Its ego is, those things are sort of a symptom of the ego. The ego itself is what makes us feel separate. And someone who is arrogant, of course, and full of pride is feeling quite separate. It's better than everyone else. And so this is why we get confused a little bit on that. But what we're trying to do, where we're going with our life, with our spiritual path, is to learn to transcend the ego. We're not, I don't know, there may be spiritual paths to try to sort of kill the ego somehow or destroy the ego, but that's not what we're trying to do. We need to transcend the ego. And one of the best ways to do this, Swamiji tells us, is through expanding our awareness, expanding who, not so much who we are in the sense of me, but expanding our sensibilities or our that sympathies. And you know, the small child comes into the world and it doesn't have very much awareness right at the beginning. It's aware that it needs warmth and food. That's about all right at first. And mostly the child's consciousness, I think, is probably still in the astral world. A few years ago, someone sent us a picture of their brand new daughter. And there she was, with her eyes closed, speaking. And I thought, she's not with us yet. Her body's with us, but she's still somewhere else. It was really quite clear. I could even see with her eyes closed, I could see that she was looking up. And who knows, I haven't seen her since then, so who knows. I'm sure that she's with us now. It's been a couple of years. But it was kind of interesting to see that. She was still somewhere else, still in the astral world. And so what happens to us is we begin and then we get that, that experience that we need warmth and food and so forth. But as the child grows, the love of its family helps that child's awareness to expand. And slowly becomes more and more aware not only of its environment, but other people and so forth. And at first the child needs to learn how to interact and relate, especially to other people. And we have a friend in Pune who has a small son. And when he was about 2 years old, I asked his dad, I said, "Oh, how's your little boy?" And he said, "Oh, he's in the terrible twos." he can't behave no matter what. He's just determined not to behave. And his favorite thing to say to somebody is, "Get out." So his mom and I talked to him and we said, that's not a nice way to talk to somebody. You hurt their feelings. Let's sit down and try to think of something nice that you can say to somebody. So he came up with a new one. "Please get out." Well, now he's about 6 or 7, and I was most encouraged to see him a few weeks ago, and he was a very polite little boy, and he didn't say anything like that. It was very nice, and somebody that I actually would like to sit down and have a chat with, unlike a few years before. And so this is what we want to do in our lives. We need to expand our awareness. We need to be aware of other people's realities, our own realities as they relate to other people's realities, and to elevate our consciousness, elevate our awareness. One second. One of the ways that we can do this is by working together, and I see how you've already got that idea, you've already figured that all out. When Ananda began in the late 60s, it was it was Swamiji, and that someone put in a bunch of young friends. That's what we were. We were mostly young, and we didn't know each other mostly. Excuse me. And so we were there, and we weren't that familiar with the teachings. Most of it was new to us. And we needed to learn how to put into place this, what you might call this play, this divine drama, that we could say that God is the playwright, that the Guru is the director, and we were the actors. And we didn't have any idea, mostly, of how to be good actors. And we didn't know about the direction or how to follow direction, how to tune in to higher realities, how to understand what God was trying to say through the director. You know, the director knows, or the Guru, we could say that God is the playwright, the Guru is the director, and we're the actors. So the Guru knows a whole lot more about what God has in mind than we did. And so by slowly, over time, we learned to understand the Guru's guidance and be able to follow the Guru's guidance. And one of the ways we did this was by expanding our sympathies, expanding our awareness, expanding our sense of who we are. One thing that we did early on, and it turned out to be such a good thing that we did, that we continue to do it all the time and very often, is we learned to work together. We first began by, we needed shelter, and so we had a work day, and we got together, and we did a lot of things which is too long and complicated to say this morning, but we got together and we made our own shelter by working together. And people who had all sorts of different abilities, but that wasn't the point. The point was that we were working together. No one was putting themselves in a sense of above anybody else. There were people who had more skill than others, but everyone saw this as a service, something that we were doing for everyone to make everything better. And nobody cared about, well, I'm more important than you because I have this skill. They let all of that aside. And the nice thing is that's carried over for all of these more than 40 years. We have all the time, we have work days at another village and all our other communities as well. And very often you'll find that somebody who's the director of this or that, just working on some crew, doing something really menial very often, menial labor. And somebody else who doesn't have a position of authority, or maybe a position of responsibility in their normal daily life, maybe they just are a person that works in something kind of humble, and that person might be in charge, because whatever it is that we're doing, whatever little project we're working on, needs those particular skills that person has. And so in a spirit of service, that person is the one who is in charge. And everyone's happy to follow his or her guidance. In fact, people are really happy when they're the kind of people who have normally a lot of responsibilities to think about it. They're very happy to just take care of it. You take care of it. I'm glad to just do whatever you tell me to do. When we expand our sympathies, the ego becomes our friend. And that's what we want to do. Throughout our life, the more we can expand, the more opportunities we see for expanding our awareness, the more we come to that sense of oneness, and we let go of the sense of separateness, and we more and more are able to reach that state of feeling that oneness. And one day, of course, we will feel that oneness all the time. But it won't be just sometimes. that it will be all the time. Thank you.
I would like to add a few words also this morning, and she mentioned the reading, and I should read.
Yeah.
This is ego, friend or foe. I have to abide by my host's instructions here and and hook this in. Is it turned? It is turned on. So all I have to do is put it there. Okay. This morning's reading is Ego, Friend or Foe. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Jesus Christ begins his Beatitudes with the words, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." To be poor in spirit in such a way as to merit the kingdom of heaven doesn't mean to be poor-spirited. Rather, it means to see oneself as owning nothing, since all belongs to God. For all is a manifestation of his consciousness. St. John of the Cross wrote, "If you would own everything, seek to own nothing." That which the ego relinquishes, offering it up to soul consciousness, is reclaimed forever in cosmic consciousness. Nothing is ever lost. Paramahansa Yogananda tells the story in Autobiography of a Yogi of the levitating saint Baduri Mahashai. "Master," said a disciple of this saint once, ardently, "you are wonderful. You have renounced riches and comforts to seek God and teach us wisdom." It was well known that Baduri Mahashai had forsaken great family wealth in his early childhood when, single-mindedly, he entered the yogic path. "You are reversing the case." The saint's face held mild rebuke. "I have left a few paltry rupees, a few petty pleasures, for a cosmic empire of endless bliss. How then have I denied myself anything? I know the joy of sharing the treasure. Is that sacrifice?" The short-sighted worldly folk are verily the real renunciates. They relinquished an unparalleled divine possession for a pure handful of earthly toys. The Bhagavad Gita in the 3rd chapter states, "All things are everywhere by nature wrought in interaction of the qualities. The fool, cheated by self, thinks, 'This I did, and that I wrought. But ah, thou strong-armed prince, a better lessoned mind, knowing the play of visible things within the world of sense, and how the qualities must qualify, standeth aloof even from his acts.'" Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Ego, friend or foe, microphone, properly placed. Ego, friend or foe, oftentimes people have a conception of it, as Sadhana Devi said, that, oh, ego, must destroy that ego. And I've heard this said, and then perhaps you have too. It's an easy enough thing to say, but is that really what we're trying to do on the spiritual path? It isn't really. We're not trying to destroy anything. There's an interesting story that illustrates this dichotomy of the ego from, there's stories actually in the Mahabharata as well, but I'm taking the one today from the Bible in the West. It's perhaps a little less known that the life of Moses is an example of the transcendence of ego, or this relationship between ego, friend or foe. Paramahansa Yogananda made a very interesting statement. He said that Moses was a self-liberated master fully liberated master. And that he was a historical figure. Now, of course, the Bible takes historical figures, as great scriptures do. They'll often take historical events, historical people, and they'll use them for symbolic purposes also. And this was so in the case of Moses, although set against the historical background, there was something else going on as well. And in the story of Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt, the story goes, the Israelites had been enslaved, and the tribe of the Israelites had been taken prisoner, and they were enslaved in Egypt to help the Pharaoh do his works. And Moses was their prophet of the Jewish people at that time, and led them out of Egypt. Now, I won't go into that story because it's quite long in itself. But Yogananda said that Moses represented in that story, he represents the ego. And what he was doing is the ego, symbolically through Moses, is he was leading his people out of bondage. And he takes them, of course, he leads them across the sea, and then they spend, as it says in the Bible, 40 years wandering about in the desert. Now, it's not a very big desert, so how it took them 40 years has always been a mystery to people, but there's some symbolism there. But many things happened during that time of their trials in the desert. They're as we, as embodied egos ourselves, are trying to find our way out of bondage, of slavery ourselves. We are enslaved, and we wander in the wilderness, finding our way out to freedom. And we're led by Moses, with that symbolic Moses within ourselves, and he leads them to what's called in the Bible the Promised Land, and across the River Jordan. So he leads them to the Promised Land, that land of milk and honey, you might say, of there. And they cross into the Israeli, in that Palestine. They go across the River Jordan. But the interesting thing is, in this story, that Moses, who has been their prophet, has been their leader, is not allowed to cross the River Jordan into the Promised Land. He must stay behind. And they all go, and Moses stays behind. He could take them to the Promised Land, but he could not enter. And so it is, and Yogananda explains this as representation of within ourselves, is the ego rightly understood or rightly guided ego. Now see, he was a great master, he was guided by God, he spoke with God, God would direct him. Rightly guided ego is our friend. And in this case, Moses guides us out of bondage, because it is us, then the ego. And what is that? The ego is soul identified with this body. It's soul identified with this personality. It's that embodied soul within us. And if it's elevated, used rightly, it is the ego that has sent us on the spiritual journey. We want something, or perhaps it's also we're motivated because there's suffering in our lives. It was something within us that was inspired, that said the words, I want something more in life. I don't want to suffer. I want to find happiness. I want to find something greater. And it's that sense of I want this that is that ego self. And we're being inspired, of course. Oftentimes we're being inspired, divinely inspired, but it's that sense of ourselves that makes that choice of I want to do something. Now that I is embodied, you see. That's because it's suffering. And suffering takes place when the soul is embodied in the ego. But it's that suffering or that sense of wanting something more that propels us. And this is a great gift. It is what separates us from the animals. Animals have no ego, or if they do, it's just very dim. Very dim. There's no sense of I self-awareness, you might say. Self-awareness that impels it to say, I want to do something more. I want to elevate. I want the dog. Maybe, I don't know, maybe the dog does a little bit, but a dog doesn't think of its master, I want to become like him, or I want to raise up to his level. But when we get to the human level, we're given this very great gift, the gift of choice. And we can choose, you see, we can choose. Now what we choose, now that is a different matter. Are we wise in our choice? That's a different matter. But the fact that we can choose, you see, this is our gift. And this is this ability to be self-aware enough to be able to make a choice, to make progress. That's the gift of the ego. And that ultimately is what will take us to our divine goal. That's the gift that God has given to each one of us. Now how we use it, of course, it's a gift. It's a very sharp knife, that a two-edged knife, in the sense that we can very easily cut ourselves. And most people, finding themselves with this great gift, misuse it, and we end up pursuing something here, there, and yon. But if rightly used, it's our friend. Now, what are we all looking for? What is the ego looking for? The ego is looking to be happy. Now we've had this last year, we've had this, and we've even spoken about it with some of you, this movie, Seeking Happiness. Who is seeking happiness? Finding happiness, that's right. It's finding happiness. Or before we can find it, of course, we have to seek it. It's our but finding happiness, what is it that's seeking? It's the ego that is seeking that happiness. It's that sense of, I want something. Now, happiness is not what we really want. Now, we say that oftentimes, we say everybody wants happiness, and it's true. We all want happiness, or we all want to avoid suffering. It's true. But what we really want is bliss. You see, now, and bliss is not of the ego, but happiness is. Happiness is, and the ego wants happiness. It wants happiness. But really, and this is why this movie is a little bit misleading, because the ego can never find happiness for long. And that message is in the movie, but you have to listen. You have to listen. And most people, when they see it, they don't hear that. They say happiness, a wonderful environment. Oh, I'll be happy. Nice friends. Oh, I'll be happy. Good experiences. Oh, if I had that, I'll be happy. Now, these are good things. I don't mean to say that those are bad things. I'm not saying that at all. They're good things. But what happens with happiness, and what is happiness? Master Yogananda defined happiness is bliss projected outward, out into the world. It's projected outward. And bliss cannot live in the world in that sense as pure bliss, because when we get in the world, what do we have when they're in the world? You have happiness, sadness. Happiness, sadness. And this is the dilemma that we find when we seek our happiness out in the world, trying to make everything just perfect. Somehow it never quite works out. But the impulse is because there's something in our soul that wants bliss, and it wants it, and it wants it, and it recognizes, and it's seeking it. It's like the musk deer seeking that scent when it's inside, but it looks outside. And that's us. Bliss is inside, but we project it out, and we look for happiness. And the ego wants to be satisfied in that way, but it can't. Because as long as we live in the ego, through the ego, no matter how elevated, no matter how pure, it'll never be perfectly pure, because it's out in the world of relativity. And we must transcend that ego, go beyond that ego, And then we can find what we're really looking for. But this does not mean we shouldn't use the ego at its highest octave. It should be our friend. The ego slowly, slowly, slowly guides us wisely. And so it takes us to more and more refined experiences. And it takes us, because we live, as long as we live in this world, as long as we're breathing this free air, as Lady Mashai said, or as Swami Shri Teshwar said, as long as we breathe this free air of this world, we're obligated to give grateful service. In other words, reciprocate. We're in the world of karma, is what that is saying. As long as we're in the world of the breathing, we're in the world of karma and the action, reaction. So we have to refine it. And we have to give grateful service. We have to. And when slowly, 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 we get to the point where we can let it go and transcend it. So we use it, and then we put it aside. And this is what all of us want, is to purify that ego so that we can get behind the ego to that bliss that resides there. Swami Kriyananda had a nice way of saying this about the ego, about himself. And the ego, as I mentioned, is the soul identified with this personality and this body and what we are. And it's as long as we have that, it's our duty to be good stewards of that. We have to take good care of it. And to not take good care of it brings about bad karma. So you find, actually, to abuse your body. So in some people, in their devotional zeal, and there used to be in the Christian tradition, they would beat themselves. He says that's really not good. That's not one. It's body consciousness on the one level, but it also, to abuse yourself will bring negative karma in some way. We have to take care of it. What we need to do is forget it, go beyond it, and transcend it. And Swami Kriyananda said this in a very nice way. He says, I've come to realize about his own life. He says, I've come to realize that Swami Kriyananda is merely an event for which I am responsible. And I think this is a good way. Look at your life that way. You are responsible for it. But it's something you can stand back from and say, I'm responsible. It's just something that's happening. And you have created the karma for it, perhaps, and it's happened through you. A play, you might say, has happened through you, but it's not your play. It's just that you happen to be an actor in that play. It's an event that's going through you. And this is what the message of the Bhagavad Gita is to act in such a way as to not be attached to the fruits of action. That's how do you do that? How do you do that? How do you not be attached to it? But you remove yourself a little bit, and you can see yourself as you can see, you might say, something is happening through you. In his beautiful poem, Samadhi, the Master says, I, the cosmic sea, watch the little ego floating in me. And so his ego is still there, but he's no longer identified. He's now transferred his identification to the sea itself. And now from that perspective, he just notices that ego is an event happening for which he's responsible. And just as each of us, we have duties in life, isn't it so? All of us have duties in life. And we have and so we've been assigned some task by our employer, or perhaps our parents or somebody said, you're responsible for that. So it's something, but you don't give it a lot of attention, but you try to do the very best. I mean, it's not that you live and die if the mail is brought in on time at your workplace, but you certainly want to do it, and you want to do it rightly, but and so you do your very best with it. But it's something that you're responsible. It's just merely your responsibility. And this is how we should approach our life that way. You can enjoy it too. It doesn't. This is the other side of it. People think, well, if I'm not involved if I'm not in the ego, when we speak of transcendence, enjoying this world and enjoying life and all of that. Everybody's finding happiness, for example, or seeking it or finding it. And we speak of that, and everybody wants to find happiness. But then if we say, well, but there's one thing to truly, what you're looking for is bliss. And people say, yes, I want bliss. I want bliss. Then wouldn't all you say, yes, I want bliss? But if we said, well, there's one catch. You have to leave the I behind. You go, oh, well, who's going to enjoy the bliss? Who's going to? I mean, the idea of letting go is scary. It's frightening for people because what is going to enjoy? I'm not going to be enjoying. This is the dilemma that Arjuna is having when he's looking at that army on the other side. He says, I can't kill all of those. They're my relatives. They're my friends. They're people I've grown up with. They're my cousins. All of those qualities which were inside of himself. I don't want to fight that. And so often we're presented with the devotee comes to be a point where he's presented with this option. Just as the little bird, the story is often said, he's been raised in the cage his whole life. The door's opened. Fly free, young bird. He looks this way, looks at it, and steps back in the cage. And I think this is for us too. The prospect of absolute freedom can be a bit terrifying, I think, if we realize I have to leave this identity, this behind. That's a challenge that each of us must face. But we come to realize, as Krishna makes Arjuna realize, that no, nothing is sacrificed. You're not sacrificing anything. We don't sacrifice. We enjoy everything then in the bliss of God. And that's what we truly want. And giving up that ego is our freedom to be able. We're giving up our bondage. We're giving up our shackles, you might say, of slavery that have been holding us back. This is what we truly want. But you'll find that in the spiritual life, in little ways, it's easy for us to think, yes, I want to transcend the ego. But look in your life, and this is why the value of introspection, one of the, self-analysis, one of the niyamas, is very, very important if understood on a deeper level. We need to look at our life and in the heart be willing to cut those strings and let them go. Because often, although it's easy to say, yes, I want to let it go, when it comes to it, there's an attachment there. So at nighttime, one practice you may try is when you meditate at night, before going to sleep and meditate, think in your heart. You can do this in a number of different ways, but one way would be mentally, Swamiji used to say, mentally build a fire. Just like we had this fire ceremony ahead of time. Just mentally build a fire. And what are those little things that are attachments, those desires, those things that are, you just throw them in? Or another way to think of it is think of your heart and think of all of the little strings that go out from it. Because the heart, the likes and dislikes, this is where they reside, and all those little things and that are binding you. And just mentally, just cut them or untie them and let them go. And just let them go and relax in the freedom that comes. And you'll see if you can do this, there's a certain elevation. Now, each of us, each night, we probably have a few things that are binding us, the troubles You can even think of it in that way. Let them go and try to go to sleep at night with a sense of freedom and feel yourself giving everything back to God. You could think of it this way. Each day we wake up, we take on our duties. God's given us things to do. We say, yes, God, I'll do my duty as best as I can today. I am your servant. I am your steward in life. I'm going to do things as best I. But it's that serviceful I. It's that serviceful I. Hanuman. We're gonna serve. And so I'm going to do my best. And then we elevate. It's the ego on the highest level. Then at the same thing, that bound ego at the end of the day is able to say, now that I go to sleep at night, God, I give it all back to you. It's all you. It's just your show playing through me. I have to do my part, and I'm doing it for you, God. And then in that consciousness, and this, of course, in the Gita comes back to the serve. Okay, that's what Krishna is saying. If you cannot remember anything that I've told you in these 17 chapters prior to this 18th one, that's okay. Just remember, give yourself to me. Give yourself to God. And I will guide you. I will enfold you. I will take you to what you ultimately want in your life. And then we should be like that. Be like Krishna. Be the disciple. Let the Guru, let God guide us in this life. And then we too get to that place where we can say, the cosmic sea, watch the little ego floating in me. So friend and foe, it's both. Make it, you understand that it has, there's an aspect of that we must leave it behind. But while we're working with it, let's use it to the best of our ability and wisely to guide us away from that bondage and then take us to that point where we can cross into that freedom. Many blessings to all of you.